So when we talk about, hopefully you guys spend a little bit of time looking at America's immigration history, and you've already talked about this forced migration from Africa into the United States that was endured by people who were captured and sold into slavery by Europeans. It's captured by other African kingdoms and sold to Europeans in exchange for things like guns and rum. Most Asian Americans and Hispanics are descended from voluntary immigrants. All right, so that's a little bit of a difference there. All right, so this here is looking at Asian American populations by country of origin. Remember, we broadly categorize 8% of our population as Asian American, but this here goes to show that of those groups, again, Chinese is the largest, Indian is a large percentage, the Philippines, we consider that part of East Asia. All right, a large group of people, Japan, Korea, not the same place. All right, anybody ever heard of K-pop? Part of a Korean culture, a very, very huge cultural influence in Asia. All different Asian groups right there. Internal migration of African Americans, the Great Migration and interregional migration from the United States South into northern cities during the first half of the 20th century. Again, trying to escape, looking for better opportunities, looking for work, trying to get out of the South. Intra-regional migration from inner city ghettos to outer city and inner suburban neighborhoods during the second half of the 20th century, kind of classify more modern look at African American migration. And again, like I said just a little while ago, very, very recent, you start to see this kind of reverse migration trend with more African Americans coming back from those cities in the north into places in the south where their parts of their family may still live, or where they feel a strong connection to the geography on the basis of, this is where my ancestors are from, so this is where I want to go and where I want to be. So geography plays a really big important role in the movement and distribution of ethnic groups. Here is a graphic that shows the Great Migration into some of these key cities, which we already looked at: St. Louis and Chicago and Detroit. Cleveland was one of the destinations. Philadelphia, New York, and Boston, and also over here in the West, San Francisco and Los Angeles, mainly Los Angeles out of the two of those. Now, looking at this a little bit further on, what starts to happen here is this idea of the expansion of the ghettos, essentially. The expansion of these ethnic neighborhoods is where I'm looking for, into areas kind of in the suburban area, away from the city center, and became known as ghettos. Now, the word ghetto actually originates from World War II, and we were looking at the ghettos that were established, or the terrible placing, the terrible housing that were in these areas they put Jews before they started the final solution. Okay, these areas were known as ghettos, and Jews were forced to live there, and they didn't have adequate sanitation or education or any of these things. So when we look at ghettos today, it kind of means the same thing, except that maybe they're not so. Maybe it's not our country pushing people to live in these ghettos or pushing the existence of these ghettos to grow, but maybe it is. Maybe it is. This here is the same. Oh, no, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. Look down here at the bottom of this slide. Many whites fled their neighborhoods when blacks began moving in nearby. And this started to happen in the mid-1900s. Okay, so from roughly 1950 into all the way up to 2000, and really in some places today it still happens. You see a lot of people of color, but mainly African Americans, might move into what was traditionally a white neighborhood, and the more people of color move in there, the more white people tend to move out. And not only that, but this mentality was propagated, if you will, by real estate agents. Here are three terms that I want to give you. And the first one is white flight. We just talked about this. When blacks move into a neighborhood, whites would move out. All right. Blockbusting, however, is kind of like adding fuel to the fire when it comes to white flight. Real estate agents would pick up on this, and what they did was they established a practice of saying basically, hey, well, we've got these black people moving into our neighborhood, and so your property is about to go down considerably in its value, and really the best thing you can do now is sell your house, and go move somewhere else. Okay, and real estate agents would take advantage of this and say buy these houses for really cheap, and then go back and sell them a little bit more pricey to blacks. It's pretty crooked. All right. This here is the process, like I said, of blockbusting. It added to the phenomenon of white flight in some of these cities. So you can imagine the places where maybe in the inner city there was large African-American populations. Now, as white flight takes place and blockbusting takes place, you literally grow those ghettos, those ghetto areas outward from the city. So I think I've got a map. Well, hopefully I'll get to it in a second. If not, we'll go back and look at Chicago and see how this happened. But the last of these practices that I need you guys to know, or that you should definitely know for the test, is going to be the practice of redlining, right? And all of these things are related. All of them are related. Redlining is when a bank refuses to give loans to someone on the basis of where they live, because they're like, based on where you live, you're not going to be able to pay your loans. Wow. No. If we look in South Carolina, and we already talked about how people live clustered in different ethnic groups, wouldn't the places where they have the least amount of money also kind of be the places where the most blacks live? Yeah. So what you're looking at here is a policy that is essentially racist in the way it's established. They say that they're not going to loan to someone on the basis of they don't feel like they can get their money back, which makes sense when you think about that. But then it's really what it really is we're not going to loan you money if you're black. And there are some cases, even today, where you might see people that make more money than me that are black that have a hard time getting a house than people that are white. People of color, even today, have a harder time getting a mortgage. Look at this. Here's the video I was just telling you about. If I had time, man, I'd show it to you right now. I don't want to do that. It's here. I'm gonna give you guys a little bit of time to write it down. All right, go ahead and write this down and watch it. It's like maybe a 7-minute video. It has a big old fat F-bomb at the very beginning, so watch out for that. You know, parental guidance advised. But it really is very eye-opening about the practice of redlining. So if you're confused about how that looks, or if you want to know more about it, please go watch this video and forgive the big F-bomb. The practice of racist policies, such as redlining and blockbusting, has led to racial iniquity that persists to this day in all walks of our society. Another thing that I didn't include in the slide that I should have is in the South, God bless the South. I love living where I live, not necessarily South Carolina, but in the South, there are schools that have, in the last 3 or 4 years, had their first integrated proms. Now you might think, how in the world can that possibly happen? Google it, guys. You can see where there are schools that had their first integrated prom. You've got places where the railroad tracks separate not only racial identity, not only racial ethnicities, but also people on the basis of how much money they have. People on the eastern side of the railroad track, western side, go to affluent white school. People on the eastern side go to the poor, predominantly African American school, or whatever the ethnic diversity might be, not white. There's other groups where I was just reading an article about Charleston, Charlotte. Charlotte being a place where you would think that people will be born into having more opportunity than their parents, but in fact, in Charlotte, they have less opportunity than what their parents have. This is regardless of race. But one of the things is that the black population there suffers because a lot of the more affluent parts of Charlotte, the white parents with the most income may send their kids to a private school that's predominantly white, where right down the road, the public school is going to be predominantly black and is going to be suffering because, you might could have more money or more resources and things that come into the school, but people choose to go private rather than to share that across ethnic lines. This here is the opportunity atlas I was talking about. This here is the map that correlates with the article. You can see that places in the South are really, 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 really low on this opportunity index. What I mean by opportunity is like my generation and definitely y'all's generation is we're like the first collective groups in U.S. history that is not necessarily likely to be better off than our parents were. All right. Every successive group since the origin of our country, the kids have done better economically in terms of opportunity than their parents have. But you're starting to see where in parts of the country, based on geography, that may not be the case, which points to a simple fact. Based on where you are born, it could play into the environmental factors there, could play into whether or not you're going to be successful. And that, man, that we need to do something, right? Don't we need to do something? This here is a graphic that shows students suspended from school compared to student population by race, sex, and disability status, school year 2013-2014. I'm going to read this to you. It's kind of hard to understand, but it points to a central theme, okay? This chart shows whether each group of students was underrepresented or overrepresented among students suspended out of school. For example, boys were overrepresented by 18 percentage points because they made up 50% of all students, but nearly 70% of the students suspended out of school. So you would think that if boys made up 50% of all kids in school, then the amount of kids suspended that were boys should be somewhere around 50%, right? If the amount of all students or maybe 30% are African American, then why would you have, like in this situation here, it says representation of students suspended out of school compared to student population by level of school poverty? It doesn't matter which way you're looking at this. If blacks are going to be 15.5% of the population, why are they making up 23.2% of all the suspensions in the school system? So when we look at data, and that's what this is data, it's numbers. Statistically, you're more likely to be suspended if you're black. So that makes us ask hard questions. And we know that there's not there's not a such thing really. You can't race is socially constructed. Race is based on color of skin and physical attributes. It's not based on DNA and intelligence. So why in the world blacks being written up more? There's another study that shows that by the time kids are 10 years old, usually we think about kids still as innocent or as having some degree of innocence. Well, socially, based on perception, more people feel that black boys in particular lose their innocence factor sooner than other kids of other colors of the same age. Does that make sense what I just now said? So a lot of it is social perception. So race, even though it's something that may be socially constructed, is very, very real in the implications and the geography, which makes it definitely something that's worth studying. These are geographers are really concerned about, or I guess are really interested in understanding racial geography for these reasons. Here's Chicago again. As you can see, the expansion of the African American population outwards as these ghettos form from the outside of Chicago. All right, that's the reason why I put that there again. Again, looking at white flight, you can see that the white population in Detroit goes up by 1950. After the Great Migration period, you start to see way more African Americans moving in, and the whites moved out as that occurred. Now, one more thing that you want to point out here is that this tail end from 2000 all the way down to 2010, and you can imagine it would go down to 2018. Detroit's population is declining still. In general, the population in Detroit is declining. It's kind of like a ground zero for trying to, I guess they're trying to figure out ways to revitalize the economy of that city. It used to be a very big manufacturing city. Steel was kind of a big deal there. Automobiles and all that is in decline. So in general, the population is going down, but you can definitely see this white flight right there. Segregation by ethnicity and race. You've got Plessy versus Ferguson. I had to throw this in here because this is something you definitely need to know. This here is where the idea of segregation became the legal law of the land. and it's because of the separate but equal doctrine that became a part of this Plessy versus Ferguson case. Essentially, what it was saying is that as long as the blacks and whites were given things on equal basis, segregation is okay. But when you start to say whites go here and blacks go here, and you start to segregate anyway, inherently that means that it's not going to be the same. And you start seeing that with not just drinking fountains and restrooms and restaurants, but you see that with schools and things that lead to opportunity. Jim Crow, what this refers to as is the kind of de facto matter of fact laws that existed in southern states. They were not necessarily law of the land after, but they were state laws. They were state laws that were enforced by state governments, and the federal government had very little ability to do anything about it. That's what led to the Great Migration. In South Africa, they had very, very similar thing going on, kind of correlating with our civil rights. Well, I guess with our racial policies. In fact, really, apartheid went all the way up until the early 1990s. You guys heard of Nelson Mandela? I would write his name down. Nelson Mandela was an advocate for equal rights in South Africa. Apartheid is the name of their Jim Crow, more or less. Some of the differences in South Africa is the majority population in South Africa was, in fact, black, whereas the majority population in the United States was white, but the whites still held the power in South Africa and still oppressed the majority blacks. Nelson Mandela actually went to jail for a huge amount of time for his advocacy for black rights in the apartheid South Africa. But after the first free elections in South Africa, he was named to be the president of South Africa, and was kind of globally revered as a hero of civil rights. He only recently died, I want to say somewhere around 2010, 2011. I can't remember exactly when it was. Here's a picture of apartheid South Africa. Now, I'm almost out of time, so I want to talk a little bit about nationality, and then I'll probably go and wrap it up. And next week, what's next week? I gotta make sure I'm planning. Probably the next time we meet, we're going to start looking at political geography, and I'm also going to probably talk a little bit about the ethnic diversity in places like the Balkans, the former Yugoslavia, as well as parts of Africa, because really we need to have those conversations, but they do kind of overlap with political geography. So that's kind of the direction we're going to go. But